Day 1040 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 785,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,730 losses in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 5 tanks, 11 APVs, and 42 artillery. But then a brief look to the ruble again, up and down in the water, valued currently just shy of 106 rubles per US dollar. As we've seen most recently, price swings of anywhere between 5 to 7% for the ruble, which is significant given that a price swing of say 1 to 2% on the foreign exchange market for any currency pair is usually considered quite a substantial change, leading to this ruble becoming quite a volatile currency, with investor confidence on the decline. Then headed into the map today, and in an intriguing twist, Ukraine's Special Operations Forces has unveiled the third translated letter from a deceased North Korean Special Forces operative coming from the Kursk region who expressed remorse for betraying his supreme commander. The letter reads like a grim religious manifesto, showcasing a fanaticism that underlines the soldiers' unwavering loyalty to Kim Jong-un, even in death. This soldier, a member of North Korea's elite forces, lamented being dispatched to the Ukrainian front lines due to what he termed the ungrateful actions, quote-unquote, of Ukraine against the Kim regime. His hope to atone for these perceived sins and eventually regain the party's trust, quote-unquote, all while facing the harsh realities of combat in Europe. So it sounds like he committed criminal acts at home and was drafted into this deployment as a chance to redeem himself. Wait a second. Is North Korea sending prisoners to fight against Ukraine? That's Russian tactics all over again. So sounds like being sent to Ukraine was a punishment of some kind. Maybe these guys aren't even meant to return home at all. I also get the feeling that the North Korean wrote these messages in the knowledge that the authorities would read them. Even so, a picture emerges now of having practically a penal battalion forced to fight someone else's war. It actually feels quite obvious in hindsight. Then also in Kursk, Z channels have reported that the 810th Marine Brigade, Russia's embattled brigade in the north, has been pulled out for recovery. Now, while the official narrative suggests a routine withdrawal, one can't help but raise an eyebrow at the timing following the recent strikes on the brigade's command post located in Lvov on the night of December 24, eliminating several commanders including a lieutenant colonel. Then also for Kursk, more activity was seen. For instance, in this case, soldiers from the 225th Assault Battalion of the Ukrainian Armed Forces are currently engaged in night operations focusing on locating and neutralizing enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups, as seen here. Interestingly, while the Russians have ramped up their sabotage activities, the overall intensity of armored vehicle deployments in this direction seems to have waned. Then also on the map in Russia, squeezing in another Russia on fire multi-segment, where first we saw a lady set off fireworks inside a post office near Moscow, another post office, and decided to film it, which is turning into quite the commonality as with recent previous events just like these. Although not for the next one, because then we also saw a masked individual in Karachay of Russia who decided to express his personal grievances by setting fire to a local 24-hour bar. And since these types of events are typically not that common under the authoritarian regime, it would appear that some feel it's time for a regime change. Then headed down the map as in the Pokrovsk direction, fierce clashes continue as Ukrainian defense forces launch robust counterattacks against the Russian positions, and in the last days of events pushing back troops that attempted to consolidate their foothold in the area, the Russian troops, particularly southeast of the city of Pokrovsk itself. But also, the way that the Ukrainian forces are going about this is through where recent reports confirmed that Ukrainian artillery and FPVs have effectively targeted Russian armored vehicles, resulting in significant damage and further complicating the enemy's logistical operations. Then briefly headed north to the Kupiansk direction, where the Russian river cross operations, just north of the town, some 10 to 15 kilometers north, have somewhat stalled, or at least failed to gain some further momentum from the past weeks, as Ukrainian forces actively defend the territory just beyond the river against the Russian offensives in that northern sector. Then also on the map, to the wider map, to the Gulf of Finland once again, where the plot thickens. Because following the previous reports that the Russian-controlled Eagle-S oil tanker had been up to more than just your average shipping gig, with suspected involvement in cutting Europe's undersea cables while also transporting sanctioned oil, well, if that's not enough, if that wasn't enough, sources indicate that the now Finnish detained vessel was loaded with high-powered Russian spy equipment. The high-tech equipment on board was said to be abnormal for a merchant ship and consumed more power from the ship's generator, leading to repeated blackouts. A source familiar with the vessel who provided commercial maritime services to it as recently as 7 months ago said. So this should certainly raise eyebrows in the maritime security community, and is something that displays the lengths which Russia will go to undermine European infrastructure, all while evading sanctions. The events also highlight how Russia has effectively weaponized many of its maritime assets, with no real distinction between civilian and military operations at this stage. So this tactic is certainly a very well-known Chinese approach, recognizing the dual-use nature of Russian infrastructure. And even more updates for this region, as the rabbit hole goes even deeper, as recent reports indicated that Russia was performing training exercises simulating attacks on Finland, which were conceptualized as early as 2017, where the Kremlin seemed to be eyeing off what they deemed as historical territories. And further to that, sources within NATO suggest that these operations were designed with a clear intention to implement them post-Ukraine conflict. Now, roughly speaking, Russia's aspirations encompass everything east and south of a historical red line, extending into areas of old Finland and regions annexed until 1920. But a historical footnote worth mentioning is that a similar Soviet attempt in 1939 resulted in significant Russian casualties of 350,000 Russian troops, dead, wounded, or missing, effectively underscoring the folly of such ambitions. So safe to say, if the Soviet army couldn't pull it off back then the Russian army couldn't achieve it now. Though the bigger concern here is rather in the event that the Kremlin thinks that they can pull something off like this, where they choose to go in, fail, then mobilize 5 or 10 million Russians for an SMO 2.0, and directly against NATO at that, which would have to be what an attack like this would amount to. And as for this 5 or 10 million mobilization figure I use as an example, I use it only because it came directly out of the mouth of Russian RT news editor-in-chief Semyonin, who, of all people, suggested the concept that Russia's army should be dramatically expanded and consist of that 5 to 10 million men mark. In this case, she also asserted that after winning Ukraine, Russia should then be ready to fight future wars. What an insatiable appetite this country has. Then taking a look around on the map, because somewhere in Ukraine, Russian soldiers complain about unknown individuals posing as volunteers. These volunteers arrange meetings at specific times and locations, only for missile strikes to hit the area soon after. The resistance remains strong in occupied Ukraine. Then, somewhere in the skies, another Russian reconnaissance UAV spotted a Zala, and seen wrapped, or at least patched in, duct tape, just mere moments before its destruction. Then also, seen from the skies too, was another Russian-operated Chinese buggy travelling to the front with 6 infantry in the back tray. After first being spotted by a Ukrainian recon drone, an FPV quadcopter was called in for relieving the buggy of duty. Then headed across to some news, some Ukrainian hardware news updates, where it feels like another month, another Ukrainian-developed missile platform that is maturing, as recent updates indicate that Ukraine is advancing its homegrown Trembita surface-to-surface cruise missile program, with the project nearing completion and mass production anticipated to commence soon. The Trembita, named after a traditional Ukrainian alpine horn, is a cost-effective missile designed to enhance Ukraine's strike capabilities, with the basic version of the missile having a speed of 400 kilometers per hour and a range of up to 200 kilometers, while a more powerful variant, capable of reaching Moscow, is under development, which would therefore give it a range of at least 500 kilometers or more. Now back to the price, and I do mean cost effective, at an impressively affordable $10,000 per unit, which, even for just the 200 kilometer range variant, would almost certainly make it one of the cheapest missiles on the entire planet, with nothing comparable on the market to match the cost effectiveness of this Trembita missile. Then to some more Ukrainian hardware updates for the Mirage jet, as French deliveries of the Mirage 2005F fighters to Ukraine are set to begin in January 2025. This follows the successful completion of a 6-month training program that Ukrainian pilots and mechanics went through in France, ensuring that they are ready to operate these aircraft in active war. Then headed to a Russian hardware update, where this is what some of the Russians' elite SOF teams are driving around in: civilian pickup trucks, and increasingly the Kremlin is forcing companies and local governments to supply money, vehicles and other material to support their war effort, which is the source of most of these non-MRAPs. That is to say, not the mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles. Something they're indeed not, by any stretch of the imagination. And so we see, it appears that the use of such vehicles in direct frontline confrontations is slowly but incrementally becoming more of the norm for Russia's ground army. Then to some Russian economy news. So bonds from the financial and industrial corporation Garant Invest have taken a nosedive for the third consecutive day, plummeting 80% of its nominal value to a mere 18% for this corporation that owns a chain of shopping malls in Moscow. And so 2 days ago, the Central Bank of Russia revoked the license of the bank owned by this corporation, leading to a sharp decline in investor confidence, where, judging by the bond price chart, a bankruptcy is on the cards. Then to some more Russian economy news, as Ukraine's relentless strategic targeting campaign using assault drones has taken a heavy toll on Russia's gasoline distribution infrastructure, where this activity has contributed to a notable spike in gasoline prices inside of Russia, with 92-octane rated fuel climbing 33% and 95-octane up 30% over the past year. Now, this may or may not sound like much, depending on your perspective, but Russians were originally privy to almost flatlining automotive gasoline prices over the past 10 years. Although that is to say, the 10 years prior to the invasion of Ukraine. So while Ukraine focuses on precision strikes, Russia is grappling with the fallout, with the consequences of invading their neighbor increasingly coming back to haunt them. Then taking a brief but important look at some more Russian state media TV segments. So this is where we see more fantasies coming from Russia's top propagandist, where in a recent tirade, Kremlin mouthpiece Syolovov claimed that territories such as Finland, Warsaw, the Baltics, Moldova, and even Alaska should be returned to the Russian Empire. And quite remarkably, all said so with such a straight face. And so, Russia is arguably programmed to feel a particular sense of exceptionalism and entitlement to land that goes far beyond their national borders. Such a, like I said, insatiable appetite for expansion that needs to be kept in check, where it's quite clear that they never planned to stop in Ukraine. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. Not exactly a funny, but it does involve Belarusian President Lukashenko and his dictatorship-style regime. In a scene reminiscent of a bygone era, Uncle Luka and his ministers were spotted sipping tea during a morning meeting with this very lavish, over-the-top performance shown here. Belarusian tea ladies. Something which tends to lead one to question whether the Belarusian leadership is more interested in maintaining a facade of stability than addressing the pressing issues facing the nation, a country that, at this stage, could not survive in its current form without Russia. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment. Thanks for all of the support. The continued support there really helps keep the channel going. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!